That's my father, I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the faded photo nestled in his wallet. Silence slammed down, thick and heavy. Mr. Preston's face went white as bone. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. My ghost. But here's the secret. It wasn't just a picture of my dead dad, Daniel. It was a 30-year-old betrayal walking into the Gilded Compass. They think I'm just a waitress, a charity case, someone to be quietly paid off. They have no idea about the journal hidden in my closet, the one that holds the truth about how he stole everything. They don't know how her quiet kindness will change everything. That's my father, I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the faded photo nestled in his wallet. Silence slammed down, thick and heavy. Mr. Preston's face went white as bone. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. My ghost. But here's the secret. It wasn't just a picture of my dead dad, Daniel. It was a 30-year-old betrayal walking into the Gilded Compass. They think I'm just a waitress, a charity case, someone to be quietly paid off. They have no idea about the journal hidden in my closet, the one that holds the truth about how he stole everything. They don't know how her quiet kindness will change everything. The Gilded Compass was a sanctuary of hushed luxury. Each table was a stage set for whispered deals and veiled desires. The crystal chandeliers diffused light into a warm glow, mirroring the self-satisfied smiles of the patrons. Here, fortunes were made and broken over meticulously crafted cocktails and plates piled high with excess. It was a haven for the powerful and a gilded cage for me. My name is Sophia Novak. At 20, my reflection in the compass's mirrored walls was a stark contrast to the pampered clientele. My worn uniform felt like a brand, marking me as an outsider in their opulent world. By day, I was invisible, a shadow gliding between tables, anticipating needs before they were voiced. By night, I was a student, fueled by instant coffee and the desperate hope of a better life for my mother and me. We were drowning in debt, swallowed by medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than I could earn. Each forced smile, each deferential nod was a calculation, a desperate gamble that the tip would be enough. Arthur Preston, a fixture in this landscape of wealth, was a study in contrasts. He arrived precisely at 7 every Tuesday and Thursday, always requesting table 12, a secluded alcove that afforded him a view of the manicured garden. He was a monument of a man, etched with the sharp angles of power and the deep lines of solitude. Silver hair swept back from a broad forehead, framed eyes that were the color of a storm-tossed sea. He radiated an aura of formidable control, speaking only when necessary, his orders clipped and precise. Filet mignon, medium rare, Chateau Margaux, 82, San Pellegrino. I'd served him dozens of times. I knew the whispers surrounding him. Arthur Preston, CEO of Preston Global Enterprises, a titan of industry, a man whose every move sent tremors through the markets, a widower, a recluse, an enigma. To me, he was simply table 12, a reliable source of generous tips in a world where generosity was a rare commodity. I maintained a professional distance, treating him with the same polite deference I extended to all the guests, careful not to intrude upon the invisible wall he had erected around himself. But tonight was different. The biting November wind howled outside, rattling the compass's massive windows. I was bone-tired, anxiety gnawing at me. Mom's cough had worsened, and the doctor's visit had delivered yet another devastating blow to our finances. My mind raced, a frantic calculator tallying hours, tips, and expenses as I approached table 12, Mr. Preston's bill balanced on a silver tray. He didn't acknowledge me. He simply reached inside his impeccably tailored suit jacket, withdrawing a worn leather wallet. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, modern accessories favored by the compass's clientele. This wallet was old, softened by years of use, a repository of memories and secrets. As he extracted his credit card, his hand faltered, a momentary tremor that caused the wallet to slip from his grasp. It fell, landing with a soft thud on the plush carpet. "Allow me, sir," I said automatically, my training kicking in. I bent to retrieve it. The wallet had sprung open, revealing a collection of credit cards and a driver's license on one side. Tucked behind a clear plastic window on the other, yellowed with age, was a single photograph. Two young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinned at the camera. They stood in front of a dilapidated storefront, the words "Innovate and Build" hand-painted on the glass. One of the men was undeniably a younger Arthur Preston. His hair was dark and unruly, a fire burning in his eyes that I'd never witnessed in the stoic billionaire. But it was the other man who stole my breath. His face was open and warm, with a slight gap between his front teeth and a web of laugh lines etched around his eyes. His hair was a wild, curly mess. He wore a paint-splattered t-shirt. My heart stopped. My blood ran cold. I knew that face, that smile. I had seen it 1,000 times in the faded photograph my mother kept on her bedside table. A photo of the man who had died of a heart attack when I was 5 years old, leaving us with nothing but debts and unanswered questions. The world tilted. The murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of roasted duck, all faded into a distant hum. There was only the photo, only that smile. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached out and touched the plastic protecting the image. A sound escaped my lips, a strangled gasp that sliced through the compass's hushed ambiance, drawing the attention of nearby diners. Mr. Preston looked down at me, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Is there a problem, young lady?" His voice was a low rumble. I looked up, tears welling in my eyes. My voice, when it came, was a raw, ragged cry that shattered the restaurant's decorum. "Sir," I sobbed, the words tearing their way out of my throat. That's my father's photo in your wallet." The effect was immediate and devastating. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a ghostly pallor. His eyes, fixed on the photograph and then on my tear-streaked face, widened in soul-shaking shock. His carefully constructed composure crumbled. He saw the ghost he had spent a lifetime trying to bury, now staring back at him with my eyes. He clutched at his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. The room swam around him, the faces of the other diners blurring into accusatory smudges. Daniel. The name echoed in the silent chambers of his heart, a name he hadn't dared speak aloud in over 30 years. The billionaire, the titan, swayed on his feet, looking as though he had been struck by lightning. He was going to fall. He nearly fainted. The gilded compass erupted in controlled panic. My cry had been a stone thrown into a still pond, and the ripples were turning into tidal waves. The manager, Mr. Dubois, a perpetually stressed man, rushed over, his face a mask of horrified apology. Two waiters helped the staggering Arthur Preston back into his seat, while another discreetly dialed a number on his phone. I remained on my knees, the wallet still clutched in my hand, my body racked with sobs. Oblivious to the chaos I had unleashed, I could only see my father's face smiling from a billionaire's wallet. What did it mean? How could this be possible? My father, Daniel Novak, had been a handyman, a laborer who worked himself into an early grave, or so my mother had always said. A man of calloused hands and worn work boots, not tailored suits and vintage wine. "Get her out of here," Mr. Dubois hissed at a nearby waitress, his voice a venomous whisper. Rough hands pulled me to my feet. I was half dragged, half carried through the kitchen, past the stunned faces of the chefs and dishwashers, and into the cramped, cold back office. "What in God's name were you thinking?" Dubois shrieked, his composure utterly gone. "Accosting a guest? Accosting Mr. Preston? Do you have any idea who he is?" "But it was my father," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "His photo." "I don't care if it was a photo of the Pope. Your job is to serve food and be invisible. You are a disgrace to this establishment." He spat, his face red with fury. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. Arthur Preston was more than a patron. He was a silent investor, a man whose displeasure could close the restaurant overnight. "You're fired, of course," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Get your things, leave your uniform. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." He didn't offer me a chance to explain, nor did he ask if I was okay. He just opened the office door and pointed toward the employee exit. Numbly, I cleaned out my small locker, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and despair. I had lost my job, the only thing keeping my mother and me afloat, all because of a photograph. Stepping out into the biting wind of the alleyway, the full weight of my new reality crashed down on me. I leaned against the cold brick wall and wept, not just for the job, but for the sudden, violent emergence of a mystery I had no way of solving. Meanwhile, back inside, Arthur Preston was being escorted out by a severe-looking man in a dark suit who had arrived with impossible speed. This was Walter Finch, Arthur's lawyer, fixer, and the only person who could be considered his confidant. A car was waiting, and he guided the still-shaken Arthur into the back of a black Maybach. Inside the soundproof luxury of the car, Arthur's breathing was still shallow. He stared blankly at the passing city lights, his hands trembling. "The girl," Arthur rasped, his voice unfamiliar and weak. "Walter, the girl." "It's being handled, Arthur," Walter said, his tone calm and reassuring. "The restaurant manager has already dismissed her. There will be no publicity, no fuss." "No, you don't understand," Arthur said, turning to face him, his eyes haunted. "The photo, it was Daniel Novak, and that girl, she has his eyes. She said he was her father. It can't be. It's impossible." Walter Finch remained impassive, but his mind was working furiously. He had been with Arthur for 40 years. He knew the entire history of Preston Global, including the parts that were never written down. He knew the name Daniel Novak. He was the ghost in the machine, the co-founder whose name had been scrubbed from the official history, the friend who had vanished after what the few who knew of it called the Great Betrayal. "Find her," Arthur commanded, a sliver of his old authority returning. "I don't care what it takes. Find out everything about her. Her name, where she lives, who her mother is. I have to know. I have to see her again." "Is that wise, Arthur?" Walter asked cautiously, dredging up the past. "Wise?" Arthur let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "Wisdom left me 30 years ago in a dusty garage with a hand-painted sign. Just find her. Bring her to me." Finding Sophia was not difficult for a man with Walter Finch's resources. A few discreet inquiries, a quick scan of employee records, and by the next morning, he had an address in Queens. I had spent a sleepless night trying to explain the unexplainable to my mother. Helen Novak, a woman whose spirit had been worn down by years of hardship and chronic illness, was confused and agitated. "Preston, the billionaire?" She had coughed, her breath rattling in her chest. No, that's not possible. Your father, he knew no one like that. He was a simple man." Yet there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a shadow of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. The next afternoon, just as I was staring at a pile of overdue bills and feeling the first real pangs of hopelessness, there was a sharp knock on our apartment door. I opened it to find a tall, impeccably dressed man who looked completely out of place in our rundown hallway. It was Walter Finch. "Miss Sophia Novak?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes," I said wearily. "My name is Walter Finch. I represent Mr. Arthur Preston," he stated, handing me a crisp business card. "Mr. Preston was very affected by the events of last night. He has requested a private meeting with you. He wishes to offer an explanation." I stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate need for answers. This was the man whose associate had fired me without a second thought. Yet he was also the man with my father's picture. "Why should I go anywhere with you?" I asked, my voice stronger than I felt. Walter's expression softened slightly. "Because, Miss Novak, I believe you have questions that only he can answer. And frankly, he has questions that perhaps only you can answer." He glanced past me into the small, sparsely furnished apartment, his eyes lingering for a moment on the persistent sound of Helen's coughing from the other room. "Preston is also prepared to compensate you for your emotional distress and your unjust dismissal from your employment," he added, the words chosen with legal precision. The mention of money was a bitter pill, but a necessary one. My mother needed her medication. Rent was due next week. My pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. More than that, the mystery of the photograph was a hook in my soul. I had to know. "When?" I asked. "Now," Walter replied. "A car is waiting downstairs." With a heavy heart and a mind racing with a million possibilities, I grabbed my coat, told my mother I was going out for a little while, and followed the silent lawyer out of my world. The journey from Queens to Manhattan was like traveling between different dimensions. The rumbling subway and crowded streets of my neighborhood gave way to the silent, gliding luxury of the Maybach. The car moved through the city like a phantom, its tinted windows turning the chaotic world outside into a silent film. I sat stiffly on the plush leather seat, my worn jeans and faded sweater feeling like a costume in this opulent space. Walter Finch sat opposite me, saying nothing, his gaze fixed on the tablet in his hands. They didn't go to an office building. Instead, the car descended into a private underground garage beneath one of the city's most prestigious residential towers on Park Avenue. A private elevator, operated by a key Walter produced, took them straight to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into a living space that was larger than my entire apartment building floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking 360-degree view of New York City. The furnishings were minimalist and impossibly expensive. The art on the walls looked like it belonged in a museum, and the silence was absolute. It was a palace in the sky, but it felt cold, sterile, and profoundly lonely. Arthur Preston was standing by the window, his back to us, looking out over the city. He had, in many ways, conquered. He turned as we entered. In the daylight, he looked older, more fragile than he did in the dim lighting of the restaurant. The shock had settled into his features, carving new lines of grief and exhaustion around his eyes. "Thank you, Walter. You can leave us," he said, his voice a low gravel. Walter nodded and retreated to a far corner of the vast room, present but unobtrusive. "Miss Novak," Arthur began, gesturing to a sleek leather armchair. "Please sit." I remained standing, clutching my bag to my chest like a shield. "I'd rather stand." Arthur gave a slight, pained nod. "As you wish. I owe you an apology for what happened at the restaurant, for my reaction. You were fired because of me, and that was not my intention. I will rectify that." "I don't care about the job," I said, my voice trembling slightly but firm. "I want to know why you have a picture of my father in your wallet." To my own surprise, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, creased photograph of my own, a copy of the one on my mother's nightstand. It was the same man, Daniel Novak, holding a much younger me in his arms. I held it out to him. This was my father. Arthur took a step closer, his eyes fixated on the photo in my hand, then on my face. "His eyes," he whispered, mostly to himself. "You have his eyes." He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling himself to open a door that had been locked for decades. "Your father, Daniel, he was not just a man in a photograph. He was my best friend, my only friend. He was my partner. We were brothers in every way that mattered." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. Partner? Brothers? My father was a handyman who struggled to make ends meet. "I don't understand," I said flatly. "We started with nothing," Arthur continued, his gaze becoming distant, lost in the past. "Less than nothing. We met in a night class for engineering. We were both dreamers, both hungry. We started a small company in a rented garage in Brooklyn." He pointed to the wallet which sat on a nearby table. "That was us in that photo. The day we signed the lease on that garage, we called it Innovate and Build. We were going to change the world." He began to pace, the story pouring out of him as if a dam had burst. He spoke of their shared dreams, of working 18-hour days, of celebrating small victories with cheap beer and pizza. He described Daniel as the heart of the operation, the brilliant, charismatic innovator, the one everyone loved. Arthur, by his own admission, was the mind, the ruthless, ambitious strategist who saw the path to power and profit. "We were a perfect team," Arthur said, a flicker of warmth in his voice. "For 5 years, we were unstoppable. We turned that garage into a real company. We hired staff. We landed major contracts. We were on the verge of greatness." "So what happened?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Why did my father die in poverty? Why did my mother and I have nothing? Why have we never heard your name?" Arthur stopped pacing, and his face darkened. The warmth vanished, replaced by a shadow of profound regret. "We had a disagreement, a terrible one. The company was growing, and I saw an opportunity to merge with a larger corporation. It was a hostile takeover, a ruthless move, but it would have made us kings. Daniel, he was against it. He said it wasn't what we stood for. He said it was unethical, that it would destroy the soul of what we had built. He sank into a chair, looking every one of his years. The argument lasted for weeks. It became bitter, personal. I accused him of being afraid of success. He accused me of losing my soul. In the end, I forced the issue. I controlled the majority of the shares by then. I pushed the deal through. He paused, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. The day the deal was finalized, he came to the office. He didn't shout. He just looked at me with a look of profound disappointment. He said, "You've built your kingdom, Arthur. I hope you enjoy ruling over it alone." He walked out, and I never saw him again. You never saw him again? I repeated in disbelief. He was your best friend, your brother, and you just let him walk away? I tried to find him, Arthur insisted, his voice pleading. For years I hired investigators, but he vanished. It was like he had been erased from the earth. I didn't know he had a family. He never mentioned a wife, a child. By the time he left, we were only talking about business. I hoped he had started over somewhere, found happiness. I never imagined. His voice trailed off as he looked at me, the living proof of his failure. He gestured to a checkbook on his desk. I cannot change the past, Miss Novak. I cannot give you back your father, but I can change your future. Your financial difficulties are over. Your mother's medical care will be the best in the world. Your education, whatever you want to study, wherever you want to go, it's yours. Consider it a debt I have owed your father for 30 years. I stood frozen in the opulent room. It was the answer to all my prayers, an end to the struggle, security for my mother, a future for myself. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, but it felt wrong. It felt too easy. A story of a simple disagreement, a vanishing act, and a long overdue debt. My father wasn't the type of man to just vanish. He was a fighter. He was proud, and the bitterness my mother sometimes hinted at seemed deeper than just a business argument. Why you? I asked, my voice quiet but piercing. Why was it you who became a billionaire while he was left with nothing? If you were partners, there should have been a buyout, a settlement. Arthur flinched, a subtle but telling reaction. It was complicated, the legalities of the merger. He walked away from the negotiating table. He forfeited his shares by disappearing. The explanation was smooth, rehearsed, but it didn't ring true. It was a piece of the story, but I knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that it wasn't the whole story. Arthur Preston was telling me a version of the truth, a carefully curated confession designed to soothe a guilty conscience and silence a potential problem. I looked at the billionaire, at the gilded cage he had built for himself, and saw not a grieving friend, but a king sitting on a throne with a cracked foundation. And I knew my journey was just beginning. I accepted Arthur Preston's initial offer. I wasn't a fool. My mother's health was my priority. And the next day, Helen Novak was transferred from a crowded city clinic to the exclusive Harkness Pavilion at New York Presbyterian. Private doctors, attentive nurses, and advanced treatments became our new reality. Walter Finch handled everything with quiet efficiency, setting up a trust fund for me that instantly erased a lifetime of debt. But the money felt like a golden leash. It solved my problems, but it didn't quiet my soul. Arthur's story replayed constantly in my mind, and with every repetition, more cracks appeared. My conversations with my mother became gentle interrogations. Helen, comfortable in her new private room and breathing easier with better medication, began to remember things long suppressed by the trauma of poverty and grief. A betrayal, Helen whispered one afternoon, her eyes cloudy with memory. Daniel never told me the details. He was too proud, too ashamed. But he came home one day, a broken man. He said, he chose the money, Helen. He chose the empire over me. He never mentioned the man's name again. It was like he was trying to excise him from our lives. Did he ever talk about their company, innovate and build? I pressed gently. Helen shook her head. No. After that day, he, medication, began to remember things long suppressed by the trauma of poverty and grief. A betrayal, Helen whispered one afternoon, her eyes cloudy with memory. Daniel never told me the details. He was too proud, too ashamed. But he came home one day, a broken man. He said, "He chose the money, Helen. He chose the empire over me." He never mentioned the man's name again. It was like he was trying to excise him from our lives. Did he ever talk about their company, innovate and build? Sophia pressed gently. Helen shook her head. No. After that day, he couldn't stand the sight of his old blueprints, his notebooks. He packed everything into a single wooden box. Said it was a monument to his own stupidity. He stored it away somewhere. I think in the crawl space behind the closet in your room. He nailed the panel shut, said he never wanted to see it again. A jolt went through Sophia, a hidden box, a time capsule of her father's life before he was just dad. That night she returned to their now empty Queen's apartment. It felt smaller, sadder than before. With a hammer and a crowbar, she pried open the painted-over panel at the back of her closet. Behind it, covered in 30 years of dust, was a small, heavy wooden chest. It wasn't locked. Meanwhile, Sophia's sudden appearance in Arthur Preston's life had not gone unnoticed. Arthur had one child, a son from his marriage to his late wife, Genevieve. Gregory Preston, 40 years old, was the executive vice president of Preston Global, a man who had lived his entire life in his father's formidable shadow. He was handsome, polished, and possessed all of his father's ambition, but none of his foundational grit, or as he saw it, his sentimental weakness. Gregory first learned of Sophia from a worried call from Mr. Dubois, the manager of the Gilded Compass, who was a distant cousin of Gregory's mother. The story of the fainting, the mysterious girl, and his father's subsequent uncharacteristic behavior set off alarm bells when he discovered his father had moved a complete stranger and her mother into the most expensive hospital wing in the city and set up a multi-million-dollar trust fund. His alarm turned to cold fury. He stormed into his father's penthouse office, a place he rarely entered without an appointment. "What is this I hear about some waitress?" Gregory demanded, foregoing any pleasantries. "You're throwing away millions on a girl who accosted you in a restaurant. Is this some sort of late-life crisis? Are you senile?" Arthur looked up from his desk, his face weary. "Her name is Sophia Novak, and she is none of your business, Gregory." "None of my business." Gregory laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Everything you do is my business. This company, this fortune, it is my birthright. I will not have you squander it on some grifter with a sob story. She is Daniel Novak's daughter." Arthur said the name, silencing Gregory for a moment. Gregory knew the name, of course. He'd heard whispers of the founding ghost over the years. Novak's daughter. Gregory's mind raced, processing the implications. A lost partner's heir appearing out of thin air. It was a threat, a direct threat to his inheritance and his control. So she's come back to claim a piece of the pie. Her father was too weak to hold on to. You can't possibly be falling for this. This is not about the company. It's a personal matter. A debt I am choosing to repay. Arthur said, his tone final. There are no personal matters when it comes to our family. Father Gregory shot back. I'm going to look into this girl, and when I find the dirt, and trust me, I will find it. I expect you to cut her off for your own good, for the good of the company. He left without waiting for a reply. Gregory immediately contacted the head of his corporate security, a former Mossad agent named Callan, whose methods were discreet, thorough, and utterly ruthless. I want to know everything about a woman named Sophia Novak and her mother Helen Gregory, instructed him over the phone. And I mean everything. Every job she's had, every dollar she's owed, every friend she's spoken to. I want to know about her father, Daniel Novak. Dig deep. Find the skeleton. Find the leverage. I want to crush this before it becomes a problem. While the shark began to circle, Sophia sat on the floor of her dusty closet, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid of the wooden box. It smelled of old paper and faded ink. Inside, neatly stacked, were notebooks filled with elegant schematics, business plans, and personal notes. There were old photographs of her father and a young Arthur, looking happy and full of hope. And at the very bottom, beneath a bundle of letters tied with twine, was a single leather-bound journal. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was her father's, a strong, clear script. The first entry was dated almost 35 years ago. The last entry was from the week he walked out of Arthur Preston's life forever. With a deep breath, Sophia began to read, unaware that she was about to uncover a truth far darker and more painful than a simple disagreement between friends. She was about to read the story of a great betrayal written by the man who had lived it. The world outside Sophia's apartment faded away as she lost herself in her father's journal. The entries started with buoyant optimism, chronicling the birth of Innovate and Build. October 12th. Art and I signed the lease today. The place is a dump, but it's our dump. He's got the killer instinct for business, and I've got the designs that will change the industry. He called us the mind and the heart. Together we're going to build an empire on a foundation of integrity and innovation. Sophia read for hours a portrait of her father emerging that was so much more vibrant than the tortured, sad man of her faint childhood memories. He was brilliant, passionate, and funny. He wrote of Arthur with deep affection and admiration. They were inseparable, two halves of a whole. Then about 5 years in, the tone began to shift. The entries became shorter, tinged with anxiety. March 4th. Had another argument with Art tonight. He's been in talks with Titan Consolidated. They're corporate vultures. He calls it a strategic merger. I call it selling our soul. He doesn't see it. The numbers, the market share. That's all he sees anymore. He's starting to look at people like they're assets or liabilities, not people. April 21st. Art went behind my back. He used his majority share to leverage a preliminary deal with Titan. He claims it's for our own good to protect us from being crushed. But the terms, they want us to use cheaper substandard materials to cut cost. They want us to lay off half of our original workshop crew, the men who built this place with us. This isn't what we stood for. Sophia's blood ran cold as she read on. This was no simple disagreement. This was a fundamental clash of values. Arthur's version of the story was a sanitized, self-serving lie. The final entries were filled with a desperate, heartbreaking anguish. May 15th, I confronted him today with the final terms. I showed him the clauses about the environmental shortcuts, the pension fund diversions for the workers. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me, his eyes like chips of ice, and said, "This is the price of greatness, Danny. You're too sentimental to understand." He said my sentimentality was a liability he could no longer afford. He offered me a buyout, a pittance, a fraction of what my half is worth, structured in a way that I would have to sign an ironclad non-compete in a non-disclosure agreement. It was hush money. May 18th, he held the final vote today. He had secured the board. I was the lone dissenting voice. My own company, the one I poured my lifeblood into, voted to cannibalize itself. After the meeting, he had the gall to tell me he was doing this for us. I told him there was no us anymore. There was only him. The final entry was the most damning. It was written the day after Daniel Novak walked out of the company for the last time. May 20th. I am a ghost. Art's lawyers have systematically pushed me out. They found loopholes in our original partnership agreement, the one we wrote ourselves on a napkin in a diner. My shares are worthless unless I accept his insulting offer. If I fight it, they will bury me in legal fees I cannot afford. He knew that. He planned this. This wasn't a hostile takeover of another company. It was a hostile takeover of my life. He didn't just push me out. He engineered my destruction to clear his path. He erased me. I have nothing left but my pride. I will not take his blood money. I will not let him own my silence. I will disappear. I will start again. Helen and I will survive. I will never let his name be spoken in my house again. Let him have his cold, empty kingdom. Sophia closed the journal, her hands shaking with rage. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of pure incandescent fury. Her father hadn't just vanished. He had been financially and professionally executed by the man he called his brother. Arthur Preston hadn't lost a friend. He had meticulously destroyed one. The generosity, the private hospital room, the trust fund. It wasn't a debt being repaid. It was a second attempt at buying her family's silence. The story he had told her in his penthouse was a disgusting, calculated lie designed to paint him as a tragic figure, not the ruthless predator he truly was. Every hardship in her life, every night, her mother went without medicine. Every opportunity, Sophia missed every moment of struggle. She could now trace it all back to the cold corporate machinations of one man, Arthur Preston. She carefully placed the journal in her bag. The initial shock was hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She was no longer the timid, grateful waitress. She was Daniel Novak's daughter, and she would not be silenced. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Walter Finch. "Miss Novak, Arthur has been asking after you. He would like to meet again tomorrow to discuss the long-term plans for your education and your mother's care. Please let me know what time is convenient." Sophia's fingers flew across the screen, her reply sharp and immediate. 10 a.m., his office. Tell him to be ready to tell the truth this time. As she sent the message, she felt a shift inside her. The fear was gone, replaced by a burning sense of purpose. She wasn't going to that meeting to ask for answers. She was going to deliver a judgment. At the same time, across town, in a sleek, modern office, Gregory Preston was reviewing the preliminary report from his investigator, Kaylin. It was mostly biographical data, financial records showing decades of struggle medical histories. Nothing scandalous, nothing he could use. "This is useless," Gregory snapped into his phone. "I need dirt, not a biography." "Patience, Mr. Preston," Kaylin's calm voice replied from the other end. "We are still in the early stages. However, one anomaly has appeared. Daniel Novak's official cause of death is listed as a massive coronary event standard. But in the year leading up to his death, he made several inquiries to the state's Environmental Protection Agency. So he was probably a tree hugger," Gregory said dismissively. The inquiries were not general. Kaylin continued, his voice steady. They were specifically about chemical waste disposal protocols for factories in the late 1980s. And the primary factory site he was inquiring about was an early acquisition of Preston Global. Gregory sat up straighter, a predatory gleam in his eye. This was something. This was more than a sob story. This was a loose end. "Keep digging," Gregory ordered. "I want to know what he was looking for. I want to know everything." Two children armed with two different versions of the past were now on a collision course heading straight for the heart of Arthur Preston's empire of lies, and the fallout would be catastrophic. The next morning, Sophia walked into the Preston Global Enterprises headquarters, not as an intimidated girl, but as an avenging angel. She bypassed the reception desk and the offered visitor's pass, her gaze so intense and commanding that the security guards simply stepped aside. She strode into the private elevator and rode it to the top floor. In silence, her father's journal, a heavy, righteous weight in her bag. When the doors opened, Walter Finch was waiting, his expression as placid as ever. "Miss Novak, he's in the main conference room." She walked past him without a word. The conference room was another exercise in obscene wealth, dominated by a single massive mahogany table that could seat 40. Arthur Preston sat at the head of it, alone, a small coffee cup before him. He looked up and offered a faint, tired smile. "Sophia, I'm glad you came. I've had my team draw up some prospectuses for universities' endowments." Sophia cut him off by dropping the leather-bound journal onto the gleaming table. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. "I'm not here to talk about my future, Mr. Preston," she said, her voice low and vibrating with contained fury. "I'm here to talk about my father's past, the real one." Arthur stared at the journal, his face paling as he seemed to recognize it. "What is that?" "It's my father's voice," Sophia said, her voice rising. "A voice you tried to silence 30 years ago. I've read it all, Arthur. The disagreement wasn't about being sentimental. It was about you wanting to use substandard materials. It was about you planning to poison the earth for profit. It was about you wanting to fire the very men who built the company with us." She opened the journal and slammed her hand down on a page. "He writes about your buyout offer, a pittance, hush money. He talks about how you used the partnership agreement you wrote on a napkin to legally crucify him. He didn't just walk away. You pushed him off a cliff." Arthur flinched as if struck. He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the journal as if it were a coiled snake. "You didn't lose a friend," Sophia continued, her voice breaking with the force of her emotion. "You executed him. You erased him from your history and left him to die in poverty. All so you could build this monument to your own greed." "It wasn't like that," Arthur whispered, his voice raspy. "It was business. It was a different time. To survive, to build something that lasts, you have to make hard choices, sacrifices. He wasn't a sacrifice, Sophia screamed, tears of rage finally spilling over. He was a human being. He was your brother, and you fed him to the wolves to save yourself. All these years you kept his picture in your wallet. Why, as a trophy, a reminder of your first kill. No, Arthur roared, surging to his feet. The sudden explosion of sound was shocking. As a reminder of the man I was before I became. This a reminder of the soul I sold to get to the top. Do you think I've been happy? Do you think I enjoyed a single day in this gilded cage? My wife Genevieve, she died in this penthouse surrounded by masterpieces, and she was the loneliest woman in the world because her husband was a ghost who only cared about the next deal. I lost him, and in losing him, I lost myself. His confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. For a moment, Sophia saw a flicker of the man in the photograph, a man capable of regret of pain. But it wasn't enough. Regret doesn't pay my mother's medical bills for the last 20 years, she said, her voice cold again. Regret didn't keep my father alive. He tried to start over, didn't he? After you crushed him. Arthur's face crumpled. This was the question he had been dreading. He sank back into his chair, a broken man. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. What happened? He tried to launch a small consulting firm 2 years after he left. He was brilliant. He would have succeeded. Arthur confessed, shame coloring his words. I couldn't risk it. He knew too much about our early dealings. The Titan merger. I was afraid he'd expose me. So, I made some calls. I made sure he couldn't get funding. I blacklisted him. I told people he was unstable, unreliable. I destroyed his reputation. Sophia felt the last ounce of air leave her body. This was the final, most monstrous betrayal. He hadn't just pushed her father out. He had hunted him. He had stalked him and ensured he would never rise again. You sabotaged him, she whispered in horror. You actively made sure he would fail. I was scared, Arthur choked out. I had everything to lose. He had nothing. Sophia replied, her voice dead. And you took that too. The heavy silence that followed was shattered by the conference room doors swinging open. Gregory Preston strode in a smug, triumphant look on his face. He held a tablet in his hand. Well, well, Gregory said, his voice dripping with condescension. Family time. It's even more pathetic than I imagined. The great Arthur Preston crying over a ghost from 30 years ago. Gregory, get out, Arthur ordered weakly. Oh, I don't think so, Father Gregory said, circling the table until he stood beside Sophia. You see, I've been reading a ghost story of my own, and it has a much more interesting ending. He turned to Sophia. You think your father was just a victim of a bad business deal? That's the sanitized version. I did some digging. In the year before he died, your father wasn't trying to build a new company. He was building a case. Sophia and Arthur both stared at him confused. A case? Sophia asked. He was investigating Preston Global. Gregory announced, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight, specifically one of our old chemical plants upstate, the one acquired in the Titan merger. He suspected the company was illegally dumping toxic waste into the local water table, and he was gathering evidence to take to the EPA. He was about to blow the whistle on a scandal that would have destroyed this company and you, Father, before he conveniently had a heart attack at the age of 45. He let the implication hang in the air, thick and poisonous. He wasn't looking at Sophia. He was looking directly at his father, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He wasn't exposing a crime out of a sense of justice. He was brandishing a weapon. Arthur Preston looked from his son's accusatory face to Sophia's horrified one. The blood drained from his face for the second time in a week. The journal, the business betrayal. That was one thing. This was another. This was darker, a crime that went beyond money and into the realm of life and death. The cracks in the throne were no longer just cracks. The entire edifice of his life was beginning to crumble into dust. The poisonous accusation filled the room. Gregory's motive was sickeningly clear. This wasn't about justice for Daniel Novak, but about using a potential crime as a weapon to seize control from his father. Your father was a threat, Gregory said to Sophia, his eyes fixed on Arthur. and this family has always known how to neutralize threats. In that moment, Arthur Preston saw the reflection of his own life of ruthless ambition in his son's cold eyes. He saw the monster he had created. A profound, terrible clarity washed over him, and the broken old man was replaced by someone else, a man finally ready to pay for his sins. "I didn't order his death," Arthur stated, his voice suddenly strong, "but I caused it." He turned to Sophia, his gaze unwavering and filled with a lifetime of shame. "I knew Daniel was investigating the chemical plant. I sent men to intimidate him to buy his silence. The day after they threatened him, his heart gave out. The stress, the fear, I put that on him. I may not have held the weapon, but my actions killed him just the same." Gregory scoffed, a touching confession. "It's still my word against yours." "No," Arthur said, a final unbreakable finality in his tone. He looked past his son to Walter Finch, who stood by the door. "Walter, call the district attorney's office. Tell them I am on my way down to give a full confession about the merger, the sabotage, the illegal dumping, and my role in the death of Daniel Novak. It's all coming out. You're insane. You'll destroy everything." Gregory shrieked, his smug composure shattering. "The kingdom is already rotten," Arthur replied, his voice heavy with grief. "I'm just burning it down to let the light in." The fallout was swift and catastrophic. Arthur Preston's confession led to his arrest and a massive federal investigation into Preston Global. The company was hit with crippling fines and Gregory implicated in the cover-up, and his own blackmail attempts faced his own legal ruin. Before his sentencing in a final act of penance, Arthur Preston used his vast personal fortune to create the Daniel Novak Foundation for Ethical Innovation. He then placed the controlling interest of his restructured, humbled company into a trust. As chairperson, he named the one person he knew would honor its new ethical charter, Sophia Novak. A year later, Sophia stood at the head of a boardroom, not as a victim, but as a leader. The company was smaller, but it was honest, a testament to her father's true vision. She never visited Arthur in prison. Forgiveness was a grace she could not grant. But she had found something more profound than vengeance. By taking the ashes of Arthur Preston's corrupt empire and building a legacy of integrity, she had finally brought justice to her father's name and peace to his memory. The ghost in the wallet was finally home. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that the past is never truly buried. A single photograph in a worn leather wallet was enough to unravel a 30-year-old lie, toppling a billion-dollar empire and exposing the terrible price of unchecked ambition. It's a story about the ghosts we carry and the debts that always come due. It shows us that true strength isn't found in wealth or power, but in the courage to face the truth, no matter how devastating. What started as a moment of shock in a restaurant became a crusade for justice, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. What would you have done in Sophia's shoes? Would you have taken the initial money and walked away? Or would you have fought for the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this incredible story of betrayal and redemption moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories you won't find anywhere else. Thank you for listening.